Athena loved it there, just as Zeus had predicted. The nymphs of Lake Triones were excellent fighters and athletes, maybe because they lived in such a harsh environment. Athena learned all sorts of super secret ninja nymph combat techniques. The nymphs thought Athena was the best thing since sliced ambrosia. Her dearest friend was Pallas, the only nymph who could occasionally beat Athena in hand-to-hand combat. They shared the same taste in armor and weapons. They had the same sense of humor. They thought so much alike they could finish each other's sentences. In no time, they became BFFs. Then one day, Athena and Pallas were sparring by the lakeside when Zeus happened to look down from the sky to see how Athena was doing. Zeus was shocked. Athena and Pallas fought with such speed and intensity, Zeus couldn't believe it was mock combat. Athena looked like she was about to be killed. And yeah, I know she was immortal, so she couldn't actually be killed, but Zeus was an overprotective dad. In the heat of the moment, he forgot. Pallas thrust her javelin at Athena's chest, and Zeus overreacted. He appeared in the sky right behind Athena and held up the Aegeus, which she was keeping at the time, so Pallas could not help but see it. The bronzed face of Medusa startled the nymph. Athena knocked her aside her friend's javelin and counterattacked, stabbing her spear right at Pallas's gut. Normally Pallas would have no trouble dodging. Athena expected Pallas to move, but this time Pallas was too slow. Athena's spear went straight through the nymph's stomach and out the other side. Pallas crumbled to the ground. Nymphs are magical creatures. They can live a long time and withstand a lot, maybe even the sight of Medusa. But they aren't immortal. If you impale a nymph with a spear, she will die. Pallas died. Athena fell to her knees, sobbing in shock and horror. She cradled her poor friend's lifeless body and glared at Zeus, who was still hovering in the air with Aegeus. "Dad!" Athena screamed. "Why?" Looking in his daughter's stormy gray eyes, Zeus felt almost as scared as he had when he'd faced the giant Typhoeus. I didn't mean to. Oops." He disappeared and fled back to Olympus. Athena was miserable in her grief. Her friend's body dissolved back into the waters of Lake Triones, the way water nymphs often do. But Athena decided to honor Pallas with a sacred monument. The goddess built a wooden replica of Pallas and painted it with such skill it looked almost lifelike. Then Athena cut off a small section of the Aegeus cloak, which, being god-sized, was pretty huge, and draped it over the shoulders of the replica Pallas. The statue became an important artifact. Eventually it ended up in the city of Troy, where it stood in a special shrine called the Palladium, meaning the Palace of Pallas. Women could go there and claim sanctuary from Athena. No one would be allowed to harm them. Men, on the other hand, weren't even allowed to look at the statue. The punishment for doing so was death. The statue of Pallas looked so much like Athena that people began to call it the Pallas Athena. Then people got confused and started calling the goddess Pallas Athena. Athena was fine with that. In a way, by taking her friend's name, the goddess was keeping Pallas' memory alive. So feel free to call her Pallas Athena, but don't ask her if you can look at her room at the Pallas Athena. I can tell you from personal experience, she doesn't think it's funny. Come to think of it, Athena doesn't have a great sense of humor in general. The way she dealt with Arachne, for instance, harsh. Arachne had started life with no advantages at all. She lived in a kingdom called Lydia, which was in the country we now call Turkey. It was nothing special, sort of the South Dakota of ancient Greece. Sorry, South Dakota. Arachne's parents were lower-class wool dyers, which meant they spent all day stirring bolts of cloth in buckets of stinky, steaming purple soup, kind of the equivalent of flipping burgers at McDonald's. They died when Arachne was young, leaving her with no friends, family, or money. Yet Arachne became the most famous girl in the kingdom because of pure skill. She could weave like nobody's business. I know, you're thinking, wow, weaving. South Dakota's starting to sound exciting.